Yes, hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking your time here on this Sunday afternoon. Yes, let me just do a very quick off the screen sharing. Yes, in 2020, there is actually a theme for the PSLE Science, and we call it the Great Singapore Sale. And of course, in 2021, the theme for PSLE Science is actually the harsh reality. Why do I say that and why do I start with that? Well, as you know, in 2020, because of the pandemic, the PSLE topics tested for science was actually reduced. Almost more than half of the entire book on interactions for the P5 and 6 upper block was actually, the topics were actually taken away. And what about 2021? Well, 2021, the harsh reality is that there are two big things happening. Firstly, all the topics will be tested. And of course, secondly, the introduction of the academic level, right, the AL1 to 9. Yes, so very good afternoon to everyone. And I'm Cedric here. Let me just do a very quick introduction of myself. I work as a HOD of Science with MOE for a couple of years, and I was also in charge of the PSLE as the Chief Invigilator, and subsequently was involved in the guiding of teachers in the marking supervision for PSLE Science. And of course, this itself is a big thing because out of the 180 over schools, only 1/3 of the HOD Science were actually the supervisors of PSLE marking. And of course, from there, we get quite a lot of insights. Firstly, the insights about how PSLE Science is assessed, and that, of course, teachers know it as well for the school teachers. And of course, the most important part, how PSLE Science is marked. And of course, that is always the big question mark because sometimes when your kids have the answers and you refer to the given answer key, you are not sure whether the kid's answer is correct or wrong. Should it be given half the mark or no marks at all? Well, that's where my experience comes in. And of course, I would be very glad to share them with you over the course of the next few weeks or months in our sessions. And of course, throughout the years of teaching, we have got some awards here and there. And of course, one of the important works that we have completed is actually being the first in SG to come out with an Answering Technique book that was part of NLB's permanent collection. And we'll talk more about the book later because today the focus is actually on the book itself. And of course, my co-partner, there's Elda, who's not here today because the screen is too small for both of us to share it, and it's just a 30-minute sharing. She has the relevant experience, close to 20 years as well, just like myself, and she's got her awards as well. Right, without much further ado, pardon me if I go a little bit too fast. We're trying to cover as much as we can in this short 30 minutes of sharing. Firstly, understanding PSLE Science requirement, what it is or what it takes for us to get AL1 for PSLE Science. And let's say there are two approaches. First approach, at which most parents and tuition centers use, is to shoot and then they aim. But over here at Tenopy as well as Science Heuristics, we believe in aim before we shoot. What do we mean by that? Right? Most parents, when it comes to preparation for PSLE Science, we tend to buy lots of practice papers. We tend to just dive headlong into the practice papers, be it topical or be it by the SA1, SA2 papers. And from doing that tons of papers, hopefully the child gains some insight. Hopefully the child is able to decipher what is really required of the PSLE in terms of the testing and in terms of the marking requirement. And that, I would say, is very, very difficult for the child. But what do we do instead? Well, for us, we use, we aim before we shoot. That means we look, based on our years of experience with the PSLE exams, we look into what is required from the MOE syllabus of science. Then we study what the exam board, SEAB, requires of the child, what are their assessment objectives, and from there we devise a plan to help the child do well in the exams. And let me show you on the screen, as you can see now, These are the two key assessment objectives taken from SEAB website. It's an open secret. You can just download them from the website. Number one is to demonstrate knowledge of understanding of scientific facts, concepts, and principles. Number two, of course, is to apply the scientific facts. So what does this mean to us or to your child as a learner, or to you as a parent to guide your child? Number one, they need to know the right concepts. And when we say right concepts, which we have elaborated over our Facebook and as our group sharing, right concepts doesn't mean facts loading all the time, right? And of course, the other two parts that were often neglected, what are they? They are the process skill training as well as the application training. Right? Let me show you through three examples. What do we mean by concepts question? What do we mean by process skill questions? And what do we mean by the application question? So this is an example. All the examples are taken from either my book or the PSLE booklet, which are genuine 100% past year PSLE questions. So this is a question that requires conceptual thinking, asking for characteristics of amphibian, fish, or reptile. And of course, the keyword here is characteristics, and your child would have memorized or understand that the different ways to classify and group these animals in terms of fish, reptile, or amphibian would be by the body coverings, the method of reproduction, and so on and so forth, right? So that is a concept question. What is a process skill question? Process skill questions, as you can see from this example, you are given a scenario, you are given a list of materials, apparatus, or equipment, and you are supposed to work on things related to the experiment, be it coming out with the procedure writing, which is the question requirement here, describe how she can carry out an experiment. Sometimes you'll be required to talk about the pattern relationship, the aim, the hypothesis of your questions, the variables to change here and there. That is process skill question, or those are process skill questions. And of course, the marks allocation, they used to be very generous. They used to give 2 marks, and nowadays, for all these questions, it is a set 1 miserable mark. But of course, every mark counts. Right? So that is process skill question, and we hope that through the 3 examples, you can slowly, be able to differentiate what's the difference and the lacking in the training, if there is any, and we would like to help, of course, and hopefully all these 3 are addressed before the child sits for the PSLE. And what about this? This is an application question. An application question is a scenario-based questions, and the clues and stuff like that are actually found within the question. The child must be able to apply, as SEAB has stated in the assessment objective, apply the concepts that they have learned to a given scenario. And of course, we don't need to watch all David Attenborough's series. We don't need to identify and say, oh, I think this lizard that runs on 2 legs is a basilis lizard. No, we don't need that kind of knowledge, because this is only a PSLE science exam for primary school. This is not a test on memory. This is not a test on how much brain capacity can store. That is not fair, right? And you find that, the common trigger point of answering technique questions or application questions would be give 2 reasons, explain your answer, why. So these are examples of application questions. Scenarios, animals, plants, objects, apparatus you have not seen before, and you are required to extract certain information and then explain them accordingly. Right? Well, before we go into how to tackle the other 2 components that are usually lacking, the process skill part as well as the application part, let us talk a little bit about the streaming for this year, or the new PSLE scoring. As I said, this year is the year of harsh reality. Why? Because number 1, more topics are tested, or rather all the topics will be tested, no more content reduction, because there's no more pandemic, or it's going to be over soon. Number 2, with the AL level, there is now greater, clearer resolution. What do we mean by clearer resolution? That means, right, express 4 to 20 points, and of course, because of 4 subjects, the minimum you require to do well to get into express is a 5. And what is 5 here? If we were to look at the chart, 5 is actually between 65 to 75 marks. Remember, we are no longer in the T-score era. T-score era is over, done with, died together with the pandemic. But right now, we are talking about the AL level. And the AL level, if you look at it, A used to be from 75 to 90. What happens now in the new AL level? A is actually divided into AL2, AL3, and AL4. And this is the year of harsh reality, because you can no longer hide under the guise of A and say, oh, I did very well because I got an A for science, because your A could be an AL4. And if you get an AL4, imagine one subject you get 4 points, and all the other 4 subjects you get, or the other 3 subjects you get 4 as well. 4 times 4, that is a miserable 16. And that probably puts you at the tail end of the express schools available for you to choose. So that is the harsh reality. This year, no one hides under the guise of A, because A is now broken down into a final resolution of AL2, AL3, AL4. Of course, AL1 is still your A star, right? But of course, whether you get a 99 now, or 100, or you get a 90, you still get an AL1. So that is one of the key differences, and this is a harsh reality. We can no longer use our stronger mathematics or maybe mother tongue to try to make up for the difference in the marks, right? Now, based on science, SEAB assessment objective, knowledge of understanding, if you learn and you memorize a lot of content, let's say this is an open book examination with you being able to bring in the 5 plus 4 textbook, total of 9 textbooks over the 4 years, the maximum you can get, your child can get for PSLE is actually a miserable AL6 or 7. Why do I say that? Because according to SEAB, knowledge of understanding only takes up 40% of the overall marks weighting. That means question set for ask you directly about characteristics, what is boiling, which was last year's question, by the way, that takes up about 40%. Then, what about the other 60%? The other 60% comes from the application of knowledge and processing. Those are the 2 areas that we talk about right from the start: application, process skills. And if the child is not trained in those, we can forget about getting anything above AL5 or AL4. Now, then what about this last band, that very elusive? Actually, they are also parked under application, but they are parked under application, under answering, under the phrasing part of the answering. So sometimes the child knows, but the child can't write it well, the child can't write it clearly. That's where the A1 or the A2 are gone. All right? So having understand first, so we aim first before we shoot. So having understand, or we already did our aim, we understand what is required from PSLE Science. Now let us move on to say, how can we guide your child? These are actual questions taken from the LISC Answering Technique book, which were written like 10 years ago, as well as actual PSLE questions. And this is a genuine sharing. Learn it, your child learns them, and I'm very sure it will come in very useful, because they can actually immediately start applying them. No sales talk here, right? So let's work this together. There will be 1 or 2 or 3 polls along the way, which we hope you will participate as well as we go along. Right, first, let's talk about the common reasons. 3 common reasons that your child gives you when they don't do well in exams. All right. Number 1, they'll say, oh, I actually don't understand the question. And that is a genuine concern, because as they read, they really don't know what the question is trying to talk about. 2, they will tell you they know the answers, but they don't know how to write it well, or they don't even know how to write it. That again is a genuine concern. And thirdly, child's favorite excuse or reason would be, oh, I was careless, I didn't read the question properly, or they would say, oh, the question is actually out of syllabus because I've never seen this lizard before. I don't know that it was a basilisk lizard. I need to memorize all the characteristics of the millions and millions of creatures. These are genuine concern. That means they have not approached science correctly, the learning of science correctly. Right? So the three common reasons. Then, why do they say that? Your child is not wrong. Your child are not giving excuses. They are giving good reasons why, and they are crying out loud to you to help them. To help them do what? To help them have and acquire an approach. Let's give a very simple scenario for us adults. When we are given problem sums, mathematical sums, what do? We say, oh, let's form algebraic equations. X and Y, how many apples and oranges, just name them X and Y, and we form algebraic equation. Algebra is an approach for us when we are given a mathematical question. So we are already trained to think as part of our problem solving skill, how to solve mathematical questions. Now, what about science? What about your child? If they are not trained, of course your child now, they are trained, when they are given mathematical sums, they think of models, they think of drawing blocks here and there, they think of the unitary method. But what about science? If we don't train them specifically, if we don't give them that skill and that approach, that thinking approach, they are not guided, they will not do well. And we only have ourselves to blame. Sad to say that. Right? Now, so the answering technique approach, the LIC approach, which is based on the book that we wrote like 10 years ago, is an approach that I want to share with you. So hopefully we pick up something from there and help your child along. Right? Now, if you are given this question, this was taken from my book. It was also modified from a PSLE question that was taken many years ago. If we were to give a child this question, exact wording, the smarter child would say, oh, I think I know these two fish, or these two fishes. One is a pufferfish, it has poisonous stings. B is a tiger barb. And when asked, oh, which are the two ways that B can be adapted at surviving better than A, the child, of course, who answers that the pufferfish has poisonous sting is wrong because we are talking about fish A rather than fish B, which was what was required. And of course, the child who looks at it and identifies the fish, a lot of information, a lot of content knowledge, but there's only pure memory, there's not contextual understanding. The child will say, oh, I think it is a tiger barb, it looks like a tiger, probably it scares away fish A. Again, that is wrong because that is not based on the given scenario. Right? So, if the child is approaching questions randomly, we need to guide them. So what can we do? Or what should we be doing? This is what we do. If you just ask the child to run, the child will run. But the child before running will ask you where to run, how fast to run, where is the end point, and where to start running, where is the starting point. So we developed this approach to say, let us start by telling the child what to look out for. That's the beginning. And of course, that's the title of the talk, the beginning and the end. We help the child to identify the starting point of the question. What should the child focus on? And then we help the child to identify the end point where the child should finish its explanation. And therefore, we have 4 keys. As you notice, PSLE questions, they are full of diagrams, words, graphs, and tables for science. In fact, science paper is one of the papers with the most number of pages, but the least number of questions. Why? Because science is very application-based. For the exams nowadays, 60% remembering that, right? So we give a lot of clues, and these clues, we find the key. Then the key are found in the diagram, the words, the graph, and the tables. Where exactly do we find them? In the experiment setups, as we always find that they have 2 setups, 3 setups, or 4 setups sometimes. In the apparatus or the equipment given, and sometimes detailed illustrations where they show you a particular animal or a particular plant, parts of the plant or the animal itself. And what do we zoom in then? We zoom in on what is the change condition, what is the change variable, and what are the unique or special parts that we see in the diagram. So this itself formulates or trains the child, his mind, to look at the question and say, oh, I know what to look out for, and I look them up. Once I have them, I know how to start my question. So that is what we meant by giving the child, training the child a very basic approach. So given this question, let us look at this question again. We find that, oh yeah, there are two fish. And what are the features you notice about fish B that is so-called different from fish A? First one, as I think your child would have given you the answer, hopefully at the side they will be able to spot this. Yeah, fish B has a slimmer body. We don't use the word fat, not so nice. So we say fish B is slimmer than A or has a smaller body. And of course, the other one that is obvious that we talk about, why does it look like a tiger? Because it has stripes. So the stripes and the smaller body itself is a starting point for the child. And if we can get the child to start out right, they are already halfway to winning the battle, to getting the question correct, because their focus is right. They are not talking about anything under the sun. They're not using their prior knowledge too much. They are focusing on what the question wants. So that is number one, identifying the question requirement. That's getting the key. Then where is the endpoint? How much should we explain? Well, the endpoint is actually here, survival. And of course, then we link the idea of survival to getting food or not being the food of others, or surviving the environmental conditions. So that itself helps the child to say, oh, I must explain starting from what I observe to what I do. Where do I end? The endpoint will be the keyword given in the question. So how should the answer look like from the key, which is the beginning, we'll talk about, to the result, which is the endpoint, right? Swim faster because of a smaller body. And of course, science being science, we need to put in the conceptual link. It is smaller body, more streamlined, less water resistance, swim faster. What about the second clue, stripes? I'm sure by now, if you have your child beside you, just ask them, so what does stripes tell you? Which concept are we talking about? This was a topic that was left out, by the way, last year. That's under adaptation. And of course, the Great Singapore Sale is over. This year, the year of harsh reality. We are talking about the concept of adaptation, camouflage. So not easily spotted. And you will find that this template appears, yes, good. We say that some of the participants do key in the correct concept. Yes. So you find that this template of this green box here appearing all the time, and that's what we do all the time as well during lesson. We keep training the child, we keep forcing the child to think in a particular way to train them. And of course, then from here, parents being parents, they always want to see the complete answer. They say, hey, how come there are no sentences? Well, you just have to plug them together. If you look at the bottom of the screen, the fish for clue number one, fish B, which has a smaller body, is more streamlined, is therefore able to swim faster and therefore survive better. You notice that the parts in green is the beginning and the end. So if we can guide the child to think systematically all the time, this is what your child will be able to do during exam at lightning speed, right? So the training is important. And of course, this seems like a very simple method, but behind the method, behind the approach, there's a lot of thinking behind. This is actually a very brain-based approach. Why? Because we are always, if you learn memory techniques, we are always looking for triggers. The triggers come from the question itself. So the triggers come from the key. The triggers come from training the child where to look for the key, the experiment setups, the drawings itself on the graphs or the tables or the words, and then within the graphs, tables, words, and the drawings, what do we look out for? Right? Change condition, the variable. So these are the things that we must train our child, the beginning and the end first. Then we talk about concepts. Most children have concepts in them. There's no problem with concepts. Right? The concepts are very limited in primary school syllabus, so not to worry. Then, of course, this approach or the prior approach sounds easy. How about we try that out yourself? if you look at the diagram, let me just launch the poll. Looking at the two fish, which is the key? Is it the stock food, or is it the shape of the fish? Based on the question, yes, we see that quite a lot of you have started the voting. Yes, please do so. And these polls are exactly what we do during class, during lesson time, to track the participation, the attentiveness of our students, as well as to track their understanding of the question. And that, of course, is how we use one of Tenopy's way of using technology to help monitor learning and, of course, to enhance learning. Right? Okay, so we won't spend too much time on the poll because the time is running out, and we wouldn't want to go into an extended play. So maybe we will close the poll in about 5 to 10 seconds time. So far, I think quite a number of you have voted, and let me just end the polling, and let me share the results. Yep. So as you can see, about 36% actually voted that the stock food is the key, and another 64% voted. So it's like 1/3 and 2/3 of the voting. Let me stop the sharing results. What does the question ask from us? The question actually requires us to state the characteristics of W of the fish. Between these two fish, they ask why is W better at surviving compared to fish T, the young of fish T. And of course, if we look at these two, yes, the shape matters, yes, the stock food matters, but the idea is for W to survive better is not because of the stock food. It is not because it has stock food, it's because it is of a smaller body. So again, we realize that this question was almost similar, and this was a much later question in PSLE compared to what we have given in the previous example in the book. The book was written like 10 years ago, like I said, and this is a very recent example in the PSLE booklet. And of course, the answer, surprisingly, the concept part is the same. More streamlined, swim faster, survive better. And what about the young of the fish? The young of the fish has a slimmer body, smaller body, right? So this is a very simple, but it's a scientific-based, it's a brain-based approach, not something that we just pluck out from the air and try to, pull over the parents' eyes. And of course, we don't go around asking you to claim certain things. We don't go around asking you to start by identifying the topic that is tested, because all these are actually quite meaningless to the child, because to the child, they just want to start on the question, they just want to do the question completely correctly. And so we have to train the child to first identify the clues, right? So far, not bad. 2/3 of us have got it. Another 1/3. You will get it by the end of this session, which is actually pretty fast. For half an hour, you're all genius learners, I would say. Now let's practice on another question. We see that there are two kettles. Again, these are past year PSLE question. Which kettle will have its water boiling first? Right? Same thing. Notice. Let us pull out the poll again. Look at the question. Look at the diagram carefully, and then start the poll again. For question number 2, what do you think is the key to the question? What should the child focus on in order to answer this question, to know which kettle boils, or the water in the kettle boils first? Right, here we go. Let's do it fast. That's nice. We see more participants now. Oh, by the way, I got to apologize, for the chat box, because I'm an old man here, 50-year-old. I'm not very IT savvy, so sometimes we take a little bit more time to answer the chat box and then to focus on the poll as well as the talk and the questions. So I do beg you for forgiveness, right? Okay, yeah, this time around the response is much faster, and let me share the results with all of you. 80% have got it right. The presence of gap is the focus of the question, is the key of the question, right? From the diagram itself, we can see. And of course, the other 20%, no problem at all, because as you can see, we are all improving at the same time. We stop the sharing results and close the poll. Yes, you are right. To know and to start explaining why the water in kettle A will boil first, we need to focus on the key. And the key is the presence of the gaps. So how do we explain which kettle will boil first? Obviously kettle A. Reason, because A has no gaps. There is more contact area with the heat, so more heat will be transferred, and therefore it will boil first because it receives more heat. So you find that, hey, how come these answers are so simple, so simplistic? But you know what? We didn't purposely pick the easiest questions in PSLE. We picked the typical ones, the challenging ones, and the idea that you are getting it easy or you find it easy is because you have learned how to start the question. You are arming yourself with an approach, how to start and how to end. So you know where the starting point, you know where the ending point, and of course the concepts have always been in you, the concepts are always been in your child. So do give them a little bit of credit. They are not doing well, for some of them not getting the AL1 or 2 because they are not guided in the approach, right? All right, now let's go on to another question to make sure that you know them well, you have learned the approach well, the beginning and the end, because the next talk that I do in the next month, in about 3 weeks' time, will be on how to focus on the concept link. But today, it is just the key and the results, which is the beginning and the end, so that we master one thing at a time, one step at a time, we build up the whole LISC approach, right? So again, based on this diagram, now again, they give you the key, which is the size of the dishes, and of course, the result, telling you that dish A would have less water remaining. And of course, for the P5 kids who have already done water, or the kids in P6, this immediately you get that aha moment, right? Yes, okay, I got a request to talk a little bit slow. Yes, I will try to do that because we are rushing to finish in 5 minutes time. Now, but my apologies. So you realize for the kids, if you identify first, I know that the difference is the size of the dish, and I know that the end point is about A having less water remaining. You get that aha moment. All the kids who have done water, no problem. You're going to say, because A has a bigger opening, bigger exposed surface area, faster rate of evaporations, we'll use a bit of short form here, and therefore less water remaining. This becomes easy to the child. The child just have to look at it, get the key, get the result, concepts will flow. Again, why? Because we talk about memory techniques, we talk about trigger points, we talk about the brain being controlled by the emotional gland, and from there it links back to the hippocampus or the hippocampus, and therefore when they are triggered right, that means getting the key first, not claiming some other things or trying to identify the topic first. They will get question concepts right? Of course, the phrasing and the concept link is something that we'll talk about in the next talk, right? So this becomes easy, and of course, always apply back to the current PSLE question. Again, for the child, they say, let's look at the key, which is the difference in the diagram, larger opening and smaller opening, versus the result, cone J having more water collected. And reason, again, if you have identified, J has a bigger opening, more exposed surface area to the wet sand has more exposed surface area, so the faster rate of evaporation leading to more water being condensed and collected in the cone itself. But there is a slight twist. Instead of the dish opening, now we are talking about wet sand. So again, I must highlight, do not go around wasting money buying so-called fixed solutions where they tell you 101 or 45 must memorize answer solution, because PSLE is a professional body, SEAB is a professional body. They spend a lot of time developing the questions to make sure that the scenario would have certain tweaks to it. So if your child goes in blind, memorizing answers, trying to fit in, they will be in trouble, because it looks almost similar, but almost similar means not similar, right? So that is a danger. That's the danger. Instead, teach the child an approach. For example, the LISC approach. Equip the child with a good approach. The child goes in there, the child knows what to do when he sees a question. The child knows where the trigger point is. The child is able to trigger it, link it to the concept that the child has already learned very well in schools, right? Trust me, the school is or are doing their jobs, right? And then leading to the endpoint, how much to write, which is usually found in the question. Now we have talked about the easy part, which is diagram key. Now what about word key? Very long questions. Let me just zoom in, summarize it for you. They talk about these plants that live in a hot and dry area, and they ask, why does the stomata opens only at night? And therefore, if you are pretty familiar with triggers, you should know the trigger by now. That's the key. And of course, this is the part where, sad to say, many students, when they read for word key, not keywords, we call it word key in the book, they always underline and highlight a lot of things. Stomata, they want to highlight. Gaseous exchange, they want to highlight. Sunlight, they want to highlight. Photosynthesis, they want to highlight. Literally, they highlight the whole thing. And you might as well print the exam paper in yellow or blue or green or what have you in highlighter colors, right? No, we need to teach them to zoom in only on the key. So if this plant lives in a hot and dry condition, we know that we are talking about water loss. Why open at night? We know that night versus the day, night the temperature is lower, the plant will lose less water. And that's it. That's the answer. Right? How about this, the last question that we want to share before we sum up with another tool. This is about a bird. One of the killer questions in one of the years. Two birds, but before and after they change or replace their feathers after giving birth. And they ask, why does the female and adult birds replace their feathers at different times, and the male replaces his feathers only after the female has grown new feathers? So again, let us see how well we have learned to identify the key. Is the key or the focus of the question about the gender of the bird, or is it about the timing of the change? That means one change after the other, or is it about adult male changing after the female? So is it about the male and female changing feathers, or is it about one bird changing feather after the other? Right? So this is pretty tricky, but again, if we can learn and to identify the key well, it's going to be easy for you, right? So okay, again, for the sake of time, and I realize I've been running out of time. Let me share the results. This time round is a 75% versus 25%, about there, the gender of the bird versus the timing of the change. And yes, the idea, the focus is actually on them changing different times. So at any one time, there is an adult with feathers. And what will the feathers do? Your child will be able to link it again to the concept of adaptation. Feathers, poor conductor of heat, traps. So because they trap air, so air is a poor conductor of heat. So it traps heat, gives warmth to the child. Right? So training is what you need, but we show you through today's session that it can be done. It is not difficult, but we need to train them systematically. Now, let me talk about this last two questions as a recap of why the other than content process queue as well as answering technique or application technique is important. This part, I'm very sure by now, your child knows, you know, when we talk about green and white portion of the plant, immediately the color, which is the key, is the trigger, and the color of green for plants triggers the idea of chlorophyll photosynthesis. So you see, you are already getting part of the answering technique, right? Then I want to talk about the second part, which is the process queue part. Equal size portion. And of course, equal size portion, then your child who is so well trained in the shoot then aim method would immediately say, oh, I've done this before, equal size, I know it's about fair test, so it's to ensure a fair test. And of course, in exams, they get it wrong because the answer is not specific. They are not trained in the process queue answering. Right? Equal size portion means fair test, yes, that's the endpoint, but in between, we need to plug in the concept why equal size means fair. Right? So that is process queue that we need to train specifically, but the process queue itself is a long list. We will probably take a few more sessions after the next session of answering technique before we move on to the process queue session. And then what about this question? This was a very interesting question. They ask you for the parts inside this organism that is different from the usual organism, and many from the usual plant cell. Many students were angry that year when this question came out because they say, oh, only the GEP students know. The GEP students know about the term called flagellus, which is the two, these two feeler-like, and the other students who are in the mainstream don't know, and they say, oh, it's an unfair exam. But let me tell you, during that year when I was involved in the PSLE supervision of marking of the PSLE Science, supervising teachers marking this question, it was a very fair marking. The marking room experience is something that not everybody gets. Not all the teachers, not all the HODs get. If your child say, oh, the different part is not the antenna, but the antenna-like, the feeler-like structure, your child will still get the marks. So what does this tell us? Other than identifying the key and the results, the beginning and end, the conceptual links are important. And of course, the last one, answering well, is actually the part about, the name of the feelers. The actual scientific term is called flagellus. The last part that you need to answer well is the phrasing part. Okay? So how to do well in PSLE Science? For A1, AL1, right concept. Do not over-memorize too many concepts without the real understanding. This we talked about during the last talk, so I'm not going to go too much into it because we run out of time. 2, process queues. As you can see, the whole list of process queues here. By the way, last year, the testing was on hypotheses as well as variables. And aim, fair test, and all these have always been tested. These are the classic questions, control setups. Third one, for the answering technique, other than getting the approach right, the phrasing part, which we will talk about in the next right? So if you have this map with you, and you prepare your child systematically in all these 3 key areas, they will walk into the exam feeling very confident the day before, the 2 days, 3 days before, they don't have to cram too much concepts in them because they already have the skill and the technique down. They will do very, very well in exams, and they will tell you PSLE Science is easy. Right? Now, of course, as part of the requirement for doing this talk, we need to do a bit of selling here. So I hope you bear with me for the last 2 slides. Why us? Because we are a team headed by myself for the science and Elda, who knows the exam very well. We know what is in the marking room. The killing field is always in the marking room, right? Because that's where we allocate half marks, no marks, wrong concepts, right concepts. So we know that due to our experience. 2, the program systematically equips the child through the lessons using the TAP approach, training the teachers as well as the students to acquire all these approach in a systematic, template-based manner, like what we have been sharing, the key concept result box, the green box that you see all the time. And of course, why online learning? Well, as you have experienced, the polls itself helps. We do digital tracking of the polls. We do digital tracking of the child's results during our class homework, and of course, we generate reports, and then of course the full support that you get from myself and the team. When you have any questions, regardless of whether it is part of the schoolwork, Tenopy's work, or just other questions that you're not sure, should this be getting marks or not, how should I approach this question, you have our support. We are always there for you. And of course, lastly, this is the step, the blueprint for success. You come to the seminar, which is free. You learn something. If it's useful, send your child for the trial. If they find it useful, learn from us. If not, let's not waste our child's time. Let's not waste their effort, because they really work very hard. Give them the credit. Right? Okay, so I should stop the screen now. And so, yes, I thank you for your time. I hope it has been useful. Do join us again, probably in 3 weeks' time, for the second part of the answering technique before we progress subsequently to the different process skills that again I will share. Again, this is 100% genuine sharing. You learn, you buy or not, the courses, no obligations. Right? So thank you for your time. Have a good afternoon, and see you again. Bye-bye.